It was one of those days when the home seemed to transcend reality. Sunlight illuminated the living room, casting elongated golden rays on the hardwood floors. The subtle hum of the air conditioner was my sole companion as I folded laundry on the couch, my fingers operating instinctively, the rhythm of the task so entrenched that it required minimal thought. However, my mind was far from tranquil. I could not recall the last instance when Greg had kissed me. Not a mere peck on the cheek or a hurried farewell en route to work, but a genuine kiss that elicited a flutter in my heart, leaving me breathless and yearning for more. Years had passed, but the pain of its loss remained as vivid as ever. My spouse had become a stranger inside our house, engulfed by incessant meetings, emails, and the illumination of his phone screen. His absence was not tangible, but it seemed substantial. I saw my image in the window, with the late afternoon sun accentuating the subtle lines emerging around my eyes. At 33, I was not elderly, but I was no longer the carefree girl I had previously seen in the mirror. My hand instinctively adjusted the strap of my camisole, the lace grazing genuine skin. The fabric clung to me in a manner that was both comforting and provocative. For a moment, I pondered when someone last truly acknowledged my presence. And then there was Nathan. He has been with us for some months, having graduated from college and returned to save money while seeking employment at the age of 22. He embodied everything that Greg previously represented. Vivacious, brimming with vitality, and effortlessly self-assured. His presence had first highlighted the chasm between my husband and myself, but now it had transformed into something altogether else. I saw how his laughter resonated throughout the home and how his eyes illuminated as he spoke his future aspirations, despite my attempts to dismiss the concept. I saw how his t-shirts adhered to his chest and how his scent persisted in the air. Face subtly lingered in the air after his departure. It was erroneous to regard him in that manner. I was aware of this. However, the heart does not adhere to the principles of morality. The sound of footsteps interrupted my contemplation. Nathan was searching through the kitchen. From the refrigerator, I discerned the clinking of glass bottles and the gentle shuffling of his bare feet on the linoleum. The house now seemed warmer, the air denser, as if his very presence could alter the ambience. "Nathan," I yelled, my voice unwavering, concealing the inner battle inside me. He emerged in the doorway moments later, his towering silhouette illuminated by the kitchen light, clad in a plain t-shirt, wearing sweatpants, his hair somewhat disheveled as if he had just awakened from slumber. "Could you assist me with a matter?" "Certainly." He entered the room effortlessly, his nonchalant confidence enhancing the magnetic attraction I had towards him. I averted my gaze from him, my fingers awkwardly manipulating the clasp of my bra under my garment as the strap continued to slide. I requested that you adjust my voice, which had become weaker, almost a whisper. A moment of silence lingered, like the last note of a melody, poised to dissipate. Then, I saw him advancing. My breath stilled as his hands lightly touched my shoulders, his fingertips gliding over the delicate strap as he readjusted it. His touch was hard but cautious, intentional in a manner that sent a shiver down my spine. "Is this acceptable?" he inquired, his voice subdued, nearly a whisper. "Yes," I said, hardly audible. The room seemed very confined, the distance between us diminishing with each fleeting second. His fingers lingered for an excessive duration, and I felt the warmth of his breath on the nape of my neck. It was exhilarating how something so basic could spark conflagration. As he stepped back, I turned to confront him, my hands instinctively adjusting the strap despite its inadequacy. Our eyes met, and for the first time, I perceived a reflection of my own emotions in his gaze, an unarticulated tension, a question neither of us was willing to articulate. "Thank you," I said, breaking the stillness, but my tone lacked the customary nonchalance I would often employ. "No problem," he responded, his voice similarly muted, although he remained stationary. He remained stationary, his eyes momentarily drifting to the neckline of my camisole before reverting to mine. The moment lingered, laden with unexpressed sentiments neither of us dared to articulate. Suddenly, as if the universe aimed to disrupt the enchantment, His phone vibrated in his pocket, the noise abruptly grounding us in reality. He swiftly retrieved it, murmuring an excuse about needing to answer a call. After he left the room, I remained there for an extended while, my pulse racing and my thoughts recapitulating every moment of the recent events. It was innocuous. It seemed inevitable, but the tingling sensation on my skin from his contact and the unfamiliar energy coursing through my body indicated otherwise. Later that evening, as I reclined in bed alone, the recollection of his touch persisted. I shut my eyes, attempting to dispel the intrusive thoughts, yet they persisted, and beneath the layers of guilt and uncertainty, a question began to emerge, one that could alter everything. If something so minute could wield such influence, what would transpire if we ceased to deny its existence? The house, typically tranquil, now resonated with potential, each moment laden with the anticipation of what might follow. That afternoon, the house was particularly silent. The kind of stillness that magnified every creak of the floorboards and the distant hum of the refrigerator. I stood in the bedroom before the mirror, attempting to adjust the strap of my beloved black bra, which had always been unreliable, sliding just enough to remind me of its imperfections, like too many aspects of my life. However, today the strap seemed more obstinate than normal. I pulled at it, contorting my arm uncomfortably behind my back, but the clasp remained unyielding. My mirror gazed back at me, an implicit challenge evident in my eyes. For assistance. I did not often engage in such activity. Greg was absent. He consistently seemed to be so. Asking for assistance had become a nearly forgotten habit, yet today was distinct. The loneliness weighed more heavily, resembling an expansive shadow that consumed the light. Then, I heard Nathan's footsteps approaching, the familiar sound of his sneakers on the carpet. Without hesitation, I called out. Nathan halted momentarily, then approached the source of the voice. It seemed nonchalant and indifferent, but it had a warmth that I had previously overlooked. I requested a favor, I said, as he emerged in the doorway, leaning against the frame with one hand resting on his big shoulders. The t-shirt adhered to him in a seemingly intentional manner, despite my awareness that it was not. Nathan was just calm, confident, and readily engaged. What is occurring? He inquired, his brow furrowing slightly as our gazes intersected. I paused momentarily, the words constricting in my throat, but I persevered, maintaining a light and casual tone. I indicated my shoulder, referring to this strap. It is causing me much frustration. The request lingered between us, an invisible thread connecting us. His expression shifted slightly, brows raised in surprise before becoming more inscrutable. Sure, he replied, entering the room. I turned my back to him, acutely aware of everything. The afternoon light illuminating the curve of my neck, the faint scent of his cologne as he approached, the sound of his breathing, steady yet slightly heavier than before. My skin tingled as his hands grazed my shoulder, his fingers tentative initially, then more assured as he manipulated the clasp. Is this acceptable? He inquired, his voice now subdued, almost a whisper. Yes, I said, hardly audible. The atmosphere was dense, imbued with an indefinable energy. His fingers were warm, his touch both kind and assertive, as if he were teetering on the brink of something delicate. I momentarily closed my eyes, allowing the feeling to envelop me. A little touch, but it seemed like a lifeline, he said after a pause, moving back slightly. I believe that suffices. I turned to confront him, my hand unconsciously moving to readjust the strap, despite it not requiring adjustment. Our eyes connected, and for an instant, everything else in the room vanished. The illumination, the subtle murmur of the residence, was overshadowed only by the intensity of his stare, a glance that seemed to penetrate the meticulously erected barriers I had established around myself. Thank you, I said, my voice more composed than anticipated. He responded affirmatively but remained stationary. He remained still, his hands at his sides, his gaze momentarily shifting to the strap before returning to mine, the moment laden with tension until his phone vibrated in his pocket, shattering the atmosphere. He fumbled for it, muttering an apology while glancing at the screen. I'll take this, he stated, retreating toward the door. Yet, even as he departed, his gaze lingered momentarily, as if reluctant to leave. Once he was gone, the room felt more desolate than before. The silence intensified. I sat on the edge of the bed, my fingers grazing the strap of my bra, now perfectly positioned, but my thoughts were not on the strap. Instead, I recalled the sensation of his hands against my skin and the way his eyes regarded me. Not merely as his stepmother, but as a woman. The thought persisted, unwelcome yet inescapable. It was not just about Nathan. It pertained to my own self, namely the aspect that had been deprived of attention, physical contact, and the kind of closeness that invigorates one's existence. For the first time in years, I felt acknowledged that night as I reclined in bed. I revisited the moment in my mind, each detail as vivid as if it were occurring anew. His fingers hesitated before gaining confidence. His voice softened when he inquired if it was acceptable, and his eyes lingered, imbued with an indefinable emotion I was reluctant to dismiss. I recognized I ought to feel remorse. I understood I should suppress these thoughts and entomb them where they could not affect me, yet I refrained from doing so. I permitted their presence, allowing them to whirl and flourish, nourishing the aspect of myself that had been overlooked for an extended period. And as I shut my eyes, I found myself contemplating if something so simple could evoke such feelings inside me. What other information is available? May lie dormant just below the surface, poised to disclose everything. It was an inquiry I was reluctant to address, but I was eager to discover the truth. The days after that instant seemed to elongate. Time appeared to stretch infinitely, compelling me to confront thoughts I was reluctant to acknowledge, even internally. I endeavored to occupy myself with household tasks, immersing myself in the familiar cadence of folding laundry, cleaning countertops, and watering the plants on the back porch. However, despite my efforts to divert my attention, the memory of Nathan's touch persisted, akin to a delicate trace of perfume, subtle yet inescapable. Every aspect of the house evoked his presence. The faint aroma of his cologne in the hallway, the reverberation of his laughter from the living room, and the habitual way his coffee mug ended up in the sink, despite my repeated requests for him to place it in the dishwasher. Each minor detail felt intensified, exacerbated by the palpable tension that now enveloped us like an unvoiced secret. In the late afternoon, I next saw him as sunshine streamed through the living room windows, creating golden streaks on the floor as I sat curled on the sofa with a book on my lap. I was not really reading. My eyes traversed the text, but my thoughts were elsewhere. I could see his movements in the kitchen, the clinking of glasses, and the faint murmur of a podcast to which he was only partially attentive. He entered the room, holding a glass of iced tea, and paused briefly before fully stepping inside, his presence instantly saturating the atmosphere. "You appear comfortable," he said, a subtle grin tugging at the corners of his lips. I observed my naked feet. Concealed beneath me, an oversized sweater hung loosely over my shoulders. Comfortable was not the term I would have selected, perhaps vulnerable or exposed in a manner unrelated to my attire. "It's an opportune day for idleness," I responded, striving to maintain a light and casual tone, despite my heart racing in my chest. He chuckled softly, a low, warm sound, provoked a profound response inside me. "May I take a seat?" he inquired, indicating the other end of the sofa. "Of course not," I said, but the words were very hasty and excessively enthusiastic. I adjusted slightly to accommodate him as he positioned himself, the cushion yielding to his weight as he extended his long legs, grazing against mine as he settled down. The encounter was fleeting and inadvertent, but it elicited a shudder that I wished he did not perceive as we remained in quiet, the only sound being the sporadic rustling of pages as I feigned reading while the tension between us was both apparent and intangible. The seeming thread tightened with each instant, and I felt his stare upon me, not steady but lingering. It seemed he was attempting to ascertain something but was not prepared to pose the inquiry. Suddenly, he broke the pause, addressing Ciele, his tone now gentler and almost tentative. "May I inquire of you?" I said affirmatively, but the word lodged in my throat. He paused, nervously running a hand through his hair. The previous day, when I assisted you with your strap, did it make you feel uncomfortable? The question lingered, weighty, and charged. I felt my cheeks redden as I struggled to articulate my response. No, I eventually said, though my tone was softer than I had meant. It was not peculiar, but unexpected. Indeed, he acknowledged, his gaze locking with mine. Surprisingly, he repeated the phrase as if attempting to savor its significance, discerning its place inside the expanse separating us. Neither of us spoke for an extended moment. The room felt excessively silent, and the space between us was both immense and negligible. Then, as if compelled by an unseen force, he inched closer, his knee brushing against mine once more, this time intentionally. "Sela," he uttered, his voice scarcely above a whisper, his gaze probing mine. For the first time, I discerned something in his eyes that I could not overlook, a vulnerability, a yearning that reflected my own. I opened my mouth to reply, but no words emerged. Instead, I grasped the book in my lap, closing it gently and placing it aside. My hand paused just above the cushion separating us before settling there, near enough to feel the warmth of his calf on my fingers. His breath hitched slightly, and I suddenly recognized our proximity, understanding that the slightest movement might eliminate the distance totally. My pulse raced audibly, but he did not withdraw. Rather, he moved closer, his gaze fixed on mine, making the moment interminable, as if time itself were paused, holding its breath. I felt the heat emanating from him, the energy. The atmosphere around us conveyed that whatever this phenomenon was, it was beyond the control of both parties involved. "Nathan," I said, my voice wavering but steady enough to disrupt the stillness. However, before I could articulate more, the sound of the front door opening fractured the moment as Greg's voice resonated from the hallway, cheerfully announcing his arrival. Nathan recoiled abruptly, as if scalded, his demeanor transforming immediately into one of feigned neutrality. I seized the book from the cushion, opening it and feigning an attempt to read the indistinct text. A moment later, Greg entered the room, his smile broad and unaware. "You too," he said, placing his briefcase by the door. "What is occurring?" "Not much," I said, feigning a grin as I looked up at him. Nathan remained silent. Despite everything, I saw the strain emanating from him, shown by his fidgeting hands on his thighs as if attempting to stabilize himself. Greg's focus was fleeting. He kissed my forehead absent-mindedly before proceeding to the kitchen, leaving us solitary. For an extended duration, neither of us stirred, the gravity of what had almost transpired bearing down upon us. Then, without uttering a word, Nathan rose, his actions swift and intentional as he exited the room. I remained in my position, my fingers clenching the book firmly as I attempted to regulate my breathing. My thoughts were tumultuous, the recollection of his glance and touch seared into my skin. Regardless of its implications, I was confident of one thing: it was far from done. What began as a tranquil moment had evolved into a significantly more intricate situation, and the prospect of what may follow was both daunting and exhilarating. The tempest that evening resided not outside but inward. The home was enveloped in an unusual silence, characteristic of impending change since the electricity had ceased functioning. Unexpectedly departing, the apartments were illuminated by flickering lighting, while shadows waltzed around the walls like quiet observers. To my distress, their forms altered with each little breeze. The tempest inside me had been intensifying for days, maybe weeks, and today it seemed on the verge of eruption more than ever. I sat cross-legged on the living room floor, a deck of cards spread before me, playing solitaire by candlelight as a desperate attempt to occupy my hands and mind. However, it was ineffective. My thoughts incessantly wandered to Nathan's hand brushing against mine earlier that day, a fleeting touch that ignited a lingering warmth. He was now in the kitchen. As he rummaged through the refrigerator for a beverage, his shadow elongated across the hallway upon his return. His silhouette emerged first, characterized by broad shoulders illuminated by the soft glow of the candles he carried, along with 2 glasses of lemonade, condensation forming on the exterior in the humid atmosphere. He silently handed one to me, then lowered himself to the floor with a grace that contrasted with the palpable tension between us. "Thanks," I murmured, my voice softer than intended, avoiding his gaze and instead concentrating on the flickering candle beside me, though I sensed his watchful presence, as tangible as the oppressive humidity enveloping my skin. "You're welcome," he said, his tone similarly muted. He reclined on his hands, extending his legs forward. The gesture was nonchalant and unpretentious, yet my gaze betrayed me. I fixated on the manner in which his t-shirt slightly ascended, exposing a sliver of firm, sun-kissed skin above his waistband. I compelled myself to avert my eyes, but the image was already imprinted in my memory. "Power outages always feel peculiar," I remarked, my voice permeating the silence as if the world had momentarily halted. He concurred, his gaze still directed at me, asserting that everything feels altered. In this silence, the gravity of his words lingered between us, laden with unexpressed significance. I absent-mindedly shuffled the deck of cards, the sound of the thin paper brushing together filling the emptiness. Nathan selected a card from the pile, flipping it over and placing it down with meticulous attention. "Solitaire," he remarked, a subtle smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "Just attempting to pass the time," I responded, mirroring his smile, with a cautious approach of my own. He drew in enough near for me to perceive the subtle warmth emanating from him. His fragrance, fresh with a subtle woody undertone, surrounded me, compelling me to resist the temptation to shut my eyes and succumb entirely. The atmosphere between us seems to thicken with each moment, the candles throwing flickering shadows that looked almost secretive. Do you ever sense that Nathan's voice diminished as he nervously manipulated the edge of a playing card, as if circumstances were not meant to remain static indefinitely? The question surprised me due to its simplicity. Recognizing the gravity of his inquiry, I met his stare for the first time. That evening, my pulse raced audibly in my chest as his gaze remained unwavering and probing. Search for a response I was uncertain I could provide. I asserted that change is inevitable. Ultimately, my voice was hardly audible, even at moments of unpreparedness. He nodded gradually, his gaze fixed on mine. Indeed, the distance between us seemed insignificantly short, now imbued with an indescribable energy. I could not disregard the acceleration of my pulse as his hand inched almost imperceptibly closer to mine. It was a little gesture, easily overlooked as coincidental, but the purpose was clear, Claire said gently, her voice laden with significance. Unarticulated between us, I remained silent, unable to reply as my throat constricted, my thoughts a chaotic amalgamation of trepidation and need. Then, as if drawn by an unseen force, his fingertips grazed mine, a hesitant contact that ignited a surge of electricity inside me. I became immobilized, my breath constricted in my throat, but I did not withdraw. The lights flickered erratically, their flames contorting as if ensnared in the tempest inside me. Nathan's hand lingered in place, his touch gentle but intentional, his eyes probing mine for consent or even for forgiveness. I was unable to avert my gaze, unable to move, and could do nothing except remain seated and let the moment envelop me. He said that it is okay. His voice was so faint it approached a whisper. Nonetheless, I want what I want, a need that frightened me, causing my skin to quiver and my pulse to accelerate. I was at a loss for words. I struggled to express the tumult of feelings. In a tumult of emotions, I resorted to the only action I could conceive. I extended my hand towards him, my fingers entwined with his, a tacit response to the unvoiced inquiry. The moment elongated interminably, the atmosphere laden with expectation, and just as the tension approached its zenith, a distant thunderclap reverberated through the house, a reminder that the actual tempest continued to rage outside. Nathan withdrew slightly, his expression transforming into one of subdued comprehension. "We should probably check the candles," he remarked, his tone now more composed, although his eyes revealed the inner turmoil still roiling within him. "Yes?" I replied, my voice unsteady yet determined. We should. As he rose and commenced collecting the candles, I remained seated on the floor, my fingers still tingling from his contact. I understood that whatever this was and whatever it signified, it was far from the conclusion of the turmoil. Although it may have concluded for the time being, its repercussions were only beginning. The night was tranquil, but the reverberations of past events were irrevocable, and I instinctively understood that the true tempest was yet to erupt. The house was dim, illuminated only by the subtle radiance of the screen, which projected fluctuating patterns of light onto the walls. The film continued to play, its speech hardly perceptible as background noise, but I could not remember the title or the storyline. It was insignificant. What was significant was our solitude. Nathan and I occupied opposite ends of the sofa, divided by a cushion. The proximity seemed both intimate and far. My glass of wine remained untouched on the coffee table, condensation creating a fragile ring at its base. I sensed the gravity of his presence, the unspoken attraction that intensified with each day Greg was away. His absence was a persistent presence in my life, and today it seemed more burdensome than ever. Nathan had been unusually silent since supper, his typical relaxed manner supplanted by an attentiveness that reflected my own. I furtively observed him, my gaze following the contours of his profile. The angularity of his jaw and the manner in which the flickering light illuminated the contour of his lips suggested he was preoccupied. His gaze directed at the screen but unfocused, as if he were somewhere altogether. I can alter the film if you are disappointed, I said, my voice disrupting the stillness. His voice seemed more composed than my own feelings as he turned to me, his visage softening little. Negative. That is acceptable. I am only preoccupied with my inquiry, despite my uncertainty about my desire for the response. His stare remained fixed on mine for an excessive duration, causing my breath to falter. Once again, the unarticulated tension, the invisible thread, seemed to connect us in inexplicable but undeniable ways. He paused, seemingly deliberating his words, before ultimately responding, nothing important. Though his expression suggested otherwise, it conveyed an alternative narrative. I reclined on the sofa, my fingers grasping the edge of the blanket. Resting on my lap, the room seemed too warm, the air laden with an indefinable quality. My pulse raced, and I despised how palpable it was, as if he could hear or feel it from his position. I wished to articulate something, anything, to disrupt the silence, yet the words eluded me. Instead, Nathan inched closer, his movement nearly undetectable, causing my pulse to quicken as the distance between us diminished, the tension palpable like static electricity. I sensed his gaze upon me, scrutinizing me, and for the first time in years, I felt genuinely acknowledged, not merely as a wife or stepmother but as a woman. Sil, he uttered softly, my name a whisper that sent a shiver down my spine. I faced him, my heart pounding. His demeanor was inscrutable, his eyes probing mine for an indefinable quality. The film continued, its audio diminishing into the background, replaced by the consistent cadence of my respiration and the resounding thump of my heartbeat. What is it? I inquired, my voice almost above a whisper. I do not want to compel you. Feeling uneasy, he spoke his words with caution and intention. However, I cannot cease contemplating the fact that he left the sentence unfinished while it was unnecessary for him to complete it. The significance of his said and unspoken words lingered heavily in the atmosphere between us, as my mind surged with a tumult of thoughts and feelings that I could not decipher. I saw the need to cease this, whatever it may be. Before things escalated, I found myself unable to talk or act, only sitting in anticipation of the next events. Nathan, I started, my voice quavering. This does not represent us. Should I not have been informed? He interrupted me abruptly. Although we recognize the inappropriateness of our feelings, it does not alter my emotional state. His revelation overwhelmed me, leaving me feeling exposed and vulnerable. Yet a part of me yearned to immerse myself further in the intensity of the experience. His gaze sought mine, reflecting the same internal struggle, fear intertwined with desire. Guilt and a sensation of optimism enveloped me before I could articulate my thoughts. He grasped my hand, his contact both gentle and intentional. My breath caught as his fingers grazed mine, the warmth of his flesh igniting a surge of electricity inside me. I ought to have withdrawn, but I did not. Rather, I let him grasp my hand, his hold both solid and tender, as if he feared my vanishing. "I do not want to cause you pain," he said, his voice little above a whisper, "but I cannot feign ignorance of this occurrence." His words lingered in the atmosphere, weighty and inescapable. My mind urged me to stop this, to withdraw, to articulate anything that would terminate the insanity. Nevertheless, my body deceived me, leaning into his touch, yearning for the connection I had not had in an extended period. The space between us vanished as he drew nearer, his face just inches from mine. I sensed his warm, steady breath against my skin, accompanied by his clean, masculine, intoxicating scent that enveloped my senses. My heart raced audibly, yet he remained close, tilting his head slightly while maintaining eye contact, creating a moment where time appeared to halt. I said, "Nathan." My voice quivered but remained calm enough to maintain his stare. He did not answer verbally, but his eyes said everything. Slowly and tentatively, he drew in, his lips grazing mine in a kiss that was first timid, almost reluctant, as if he awaited my signal to stop, but I did not. I closed my eyes, surrendering to the moment, enveloped in the warmth of his touch as his hand caressed my face so gently it caused my heart to ache. The kiss intensified, becoming bolder and more assured, and I felt something within me rupture. A dam that had restrained years of yearning, frustration, and solitude. My hands instinctively grasped his shoulders, clinging to him as if he were my sole anchor. The world around us dissipated, leaving only the two of us and the palpable electricity that surged between us. However, as swiftly as it commenced, it concluded. Nathan withdrew, his breathing labored, his eyes probing mine with a blend of trepidation and desire. "We can't," he murmured, his voice scarcely audible. "I don't want to hurt you or him." I acknowledged my own breath, unsteady. I acknowledged my previous statement, though it felt insincere. The gravity of recent events bore heavily upon me, and I realized there was no return. The threshold had been breached and repercussions loomed ahead. The ensuing silence was overwhelming, laden with unexpressed sentiments. As I remained seated, my heart racing, I contemplated the forthcoming developments and our capacity to endure them. The morning light permeated the draperies, gentle and golden, although its warmth hardly alleviated the turmoil inside me. I perched on the side of my bed, the silence of the home enveloping me like a burden. The previous night's events replayed incessantly in my mind, each moment more vivid than the last. The warmth of Nathan's hand, the taste of his kiss, and the way he withdrew, his eyes filled with regret and a more perilous longing. I ran my fingers through my hair, still damp from a restless shower that failed to cleanse the guilt adhering to my skin. I reassured myself that we had not transgressed too far, and that we had ceased before the line became irrevocably obscured. However, I was acutely aware that boundaries are not merely crossed through actions. They are traversed in thoughts, emotions, and the fantasies we dare to entertain when unobserved. Last night, every unarticulated boundary had been obliterated, and the sound of footsteps in the hallway caused my heart to race. I instantly straightened, smoothing the hem of my shirt as if it might remove the evidence of the incident. The door creaked open, revealing Nathan, whose countenance was meticulously neutral while his eyes revealed an inner turmoil. Churning just under the surface, he said quietly but steadily, "More mourning." I responded in a voice that was slightly elevated and hasty, then averted my gaze, unwilling to meet his eyes for a while. Neither of us stirred in the stillness. The atmosphere between us was dense, laden with unspoken words. Ultimately, he entered the room. Claire started, his tone tentative, as he softly clicked the door shut behind him. As if he were uncertain about how to begin. "We must converse." I acknowledged that I spoke this hastily, my hands clutching the bed's edge. "However, I am uncertain of what more remarks may be made," he asserted, his tone resolute but kind, as he stepped closer, ultimately positioning himself directly in front of me last night, stating that it cannot occur again. I acknowledged the statements with a dismissive gesture towards my chest. Although I am aware, this knowledge does not alleviate the difficulty. He persisted, his expression becoming gentler. It does not alter my emotions. My breath caught, and I gazed up at him, my pulse racing in my chest. Nathan, we cannot proceed. It is unethical. It is intricate. All meaningful emotions are intricate, he said, his voice subdued, like a murmur. He extended his hand, brushing against mine in a fleeting contact that may have been inadvertent, although it was not. Nonetheless, I cannot feign ignorance of this reality. Real. I shut my eyes, his words piercing me like a knife. He was correct. It was authentically terrifying. However, authenticity did not equate to righteousness or safety. I withdrew my hand, creating distance between us. We cannot continue this, I stated, my voice quivering. If Greg discovers this, he will. Nathan interjected, his tone abruptly incisive. He's too preoccupied with work to perceive what is transpiring here. That does not justify it, I retorted, my frustration surfacing. You are his son. Stepson, he amended, his voice taut. And I am an adult. So are you. His comments lingered, rendering the room somewhat constricted. I averted my gaze, my hands quivering. As I clutched the back of the chair at the window, the sunshine suddenly seemed harsh. Too brilliant, excessively revealing. This matter extends beyond us, I eventually said, my voice almost above a whisper. It encompasses all other aspects, Greg. This residence, our existence, pertains to our desires, he said, his tone becoming gentler once more, and maybe it concerns what we merit. I turned to confront him, my heart heavy with the burden of his words. His eyes scrutinized mine, revealing the same turmoil that had been tormenting me. Guilt, want, and fear. He advanced, and I remained still. Cla. He spoke my name in a whisper that sent a shudder up my spine. Indicate that you do not perceive it. I attempted to articulate my thoughts. However, silence ensued as I was unable to convey my feelings to him. I was unable to deceive him nor myself. His hand extended once again, this time cradling my face with a gentleness that stirred my heart, his thumb gliding over my skin, prompting me to lean into his touch, yearning for the connection I had long repressed. Long, I muttered, my voice quivering. His gaze locked into mine, and in that instant, the world seemed to dissolve. There was no Greg, no residence, no repercussions. Only we stood on the precipice of something that felt both perilous and unavoidable. I cannot do this, I stated, though my tone lacked assurance. Yes, you can, he countered, his words subdued entreaty. We both can. Before I could reply, the abrupt sound of a car door slamming outside disrupted the moment, causing my heart to surge into my throat as I recoiled from him, panic coursing through my veins. It is Greg, I said. With urgency in my voice, Nathan retreated, his presence reflecting a blend of exasperation and resignation. He said, "We will converse later," with a resolute tone. I nodded, my thoughts racing as I approached the door, my hand clutching the doorknob as if it were my only anchor. I heard the front door open, followed by Greg's voice announcing his arrival. "Hey, honey," he shouted, with a cheerful and oblivious tone. I forced a smile as I stepped into the hallway, distancing myself from the tempest still raging behind me. However, as I greeted him, my thoughts remained in that room with Nathan, contemplating the decisions yet to be made. The tranquil moments of the day ahead would merely serve as a prelude to the impending chaos, and deep down, I recognized that this was merely the inception of a narrative far from concluded.